show, I have done so for 3 years, and that I'm just a suburban housewifey type of person who thinks it's incumbent on every decent person who recognizes that there is a degree of danger in having some high-profile celebrity / former leaders who embrace the weaponization of negative ideas about migrants, negative and misguided ideas about keeping people safe by excluding other people, and who are very, very antagonistic and hostile towards people on the left. So to a murderous degree, in that people are now putting their own lives in danger out of their extreme zealous commitment to tribalistic positioning on health measures and public safety measures. So there are now white conservative people who are putting their families in danger, putting their finances at risk, putting their own health in danger, to own the libs, or to live their loyalty to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's opening up of Pandora's box of doubting and mistrusting the media and medical expertise. So we know of the commonalities between Trump and Hitler. We know that Hitler used to use the phrase Lügenpresse, meaning lying press. And he did so because how fascism works. It's like a multi-level marketing scheme for racist hatred. And you draw people in with promises, you tell them to trust in you as a savior, you offer to be the firm father figure that they yearn for, and resolve their anxieties and disquiet and feeling of insecurity by reassuring them that they're special and that they will be looked after, and that they can cash in on their whiteness for white favoritism. So that's how fascism worked under Hitler, and as many people will have experienced, that's also how it works under Trump. And even though Trump's out of office, there's a whole lot of Trump loyalist lemmings who are lined up to refuse mask mandates, to decline, to even consider getting vaccinated. And I am accusing them of participating in a form of ethnic cleansing. I'm accusing Republican conservatives who are still adamantly anti-vaccine and anti-mask. I accuse them of knowing on some level that the people who were initially most hurt by an out-of-control pandemic were people of color, people with more exposure to the public in essential services jobs. And those jobs would not, in a number sense, in the strict raw number sense, not all people in essential services jobs are Black or people of color or people of Latin background, but those positions are disproportionately still occupied by people of color. And the risk of contracting COVID was greater for people who couldn't work from home, who did have those jobs that compel them to stay put, and that they were in more danger as a consequence, and that they and their families and communities experienced greater loss. So I contend that white Republicans recognized the disproportionate harms being experienced by people of color, and that confirmed in them a desire to push back against public health measures. That confirmed in them a desire to resist, to stand up for their freedoms and individual liberties, in a context of people asking them to behave in a way that paid respect to the mutual obligations we have to each other. So I think some of the hood has been pulled off the type of people who insist that their freedoms and their individual liberties and their choices be given given the highest priority, even over public health considerations. It's ethnic cleansing. They know that more people of colour died. But those statistics are changing direction, and such is the stubbornness and ego-led commitment to that stake in the ground. A lot of Trump loyalists now are still refusing vaccines, are still caught into the dynamics of the argument, caught up in the dynamics of insisting that it is a choice now between communism or respecting their desire to choose not to mask, to choose not to take the vaccine. So I don't know if I've apologized yet, but I started a broadcast a little while ago and I had some microphone technical problems at that point. So I was talking with no audibility, but that problem has now been fixed. So welcome back to any of the listeners who tried hearing me out before. Now, what I have on screen is going to be a selection of photos, I think, of people who died of COVID after insisting that their audience and their viewers declined to get vaccinated. So the first one was Dick Farrell, a vociferous critic of Dr. Anthony Fauci, and who urged people not to get vaccinated. He's a right-wing radio host and anti-vaxxer. He has now died of COVID. That reporting was on the 8th of August. Phil Valentine, a conservative radio personality, once wrote that his chances of dying from COVID, should he become infected, were probably way less than 1%. So he has also died now, but at least before his death, he did urge his followers to get vaccinated. So congratulations for the reversal. But again, I think it shows the devotion that people have to their emotional well-being over their physical well-being. And that emotional well-being is seemingly bound to the idea of not admitting when you're wrong, and not admitting that your sources are bad, and not admitting that your inspiration, former President Donald Trump, was selfishly trying to trick the electorate into knowing his supporters would dismiss COVID because he told them to, would decline the visible signs of a pandemic, decline to wear a mask, again, because he told them not to bother, and that this would result in an increasing division in the electorate, whereby Trump was positioned as someone who had the courage to be anti-establishment. Sometimes we look at energy, we look at people standing up to things and we think, oh, well, they must really believe it if they're going to stand against consensus. So Trump supporters admire him for his bravery, as he bravely chose to defy medical expertise, to obstruct public health measures, to sabotage public health messaging as much as he could, and to mostly avoid being held accountable for that by America's elite class of pundits, some of whom tried to describe the pandemicidal nature of the mass murder that Trump was inflicting on the American population by deliberately distorting health messages, by deliberately opposing health public safety messages in order to position Biden voters as mail-in voters who wanted to avoid crowds because they believed medical experts that COVID existed, relative to Trump voters who voted in person because Trump told them to distrust mail-in voting and to make sure they voted in person on the day. And then the complicit Republican legislators at state levels who made sure that legislation was passed that even early mail-in votes would not be counted until later. And this was Trump setting up data points to corroborate his narrative that he won the election and that things would then happen later on to try and steal it, i.e. vote by mail votes from Biden supporters would be counted later on, and that was clearly going to be theft. So he did a lot of work to both steal the election, sabotage, have his appointee Louis DeJoy, Postmaster General, sabotage the mail-in votes by delaying voting, by decommissioning $6 million worth of mail sorting machines. And then, squirrel. I'm just moved to the US, so I'm still excited to see squirrels because they are not part of the native habitat of Australia. But look, we're all in the same boat here. I am in the same boat now. Literally, I have moved to the United States. And I have so much to contribute. My goal is just to find the best avenue to do so. But until I figure it out, I'll still be here broadcasting to those of my followers who have borne with me despite very variable times of broadcasting. So again, my gratitude to those who make the effort to tune in and turn up. Thank you. I was describing Donald Trump's plot to steal the election, and I hadn't quite finished yet. So let's see if I can tie that up. My children are a little bit noisy, but they are young and full of excitement, and they haven't gone back to school yet. I'm actually a little bit terrified of them going back to school, because even in Massachusetts, where the vaccine rate is relatively high, there's still a risk of non-compliant adults transmitting the virus, and certainly all the kids under 12 are not vaccinated. So it's riskier than I would like for my children to start school. And I did come to this country in the understanding that the vaccine rollout was proceeding swimmingly. Yes, I underestimated the level of commitment that Republicans would have, or that some Republicans would have, to sabotaging the goal of achieving vaccine-related herd immunity through 85% or 90% uptake of the vaccine, bringing the pandemic to an end. Norma Jean is here. Hello, Norma Jean. She says the grey squirrels come from Europe and the brown squirrels are native. That's interesting to know. Oh, Bob is here with good news of the day. In India, apparently the manufacture, input and distribution of single-use plastic will be banned on July the 1st, 2022. Well, that's exciting. My son, hello, darling. Why is this you're upset, sweetheart? There's only 9 minutes till your friends come. Friend or friends come. Can you try and be as nice to her as you possibly can? Maybe if you take her Pinkie Pie. Is she locked in the basement?
Maybe.
Okay, open the basement door. You know, she can't open it by herself. Mummy's on a broadcast. So I don't care about the water drinking. Take Pinkie Pie and go open the door, okay?
Maya said she wants to be alone.
Yeah, but you can still open the door, darling, because then if she changes her mind. Yeah, I can tell you got an argument. Take Pinkie Pie, get my chair up, and just open the door. You can leave Pinkie Pie near the top of the stairs. Lordy. Okay, I'm going to bring this up on screen because this is a new development that I think will be welcome to the frustrated vaccinated who are... I did ask him to give it to you, darling, so that... we'll see. Okay, so... Baby's mummy's broadcasting, darling girl. Most private insurers are no longer waiving cost sharing for COVID-19 treatment, which means people seeking hospital care who overwhelmingly are vaccinated will be required to pay. So that's nearly 3/4 of large health plans. Okay, and more plan to do so this fall. So let's see, can I see that for myself? All right, so 72% expired by August 21. Goodness gracious.
Maya was the one who closed that door, okay?
Okay, but can you open it, sweetheart? It's just not a good idea to keep it closed.
She was the one that closed it.
She was, but I would like it to be left open. All right, so that's a pretty big deal. I've been still expending some energy arguing with an anti-vaxxer. I don't wish to characterize as arguing, actually, because I just tried to present arguments to him. Sweetheart, Mummy's broadcasting, so you stomping like that is not really, does not work well. I showed him a story today about hospital bills from a woman who lost her husband. Let me have a look. So there were dozens of notices from hospitals that treated Alan. $2,000, $2,700 for the ER doctor that admitted him, $2,400 for the cardiologist, $7,700 for his hospital stay, and more. Words were highlighted in red: past due, final notice, etc., etc. So they, even as they grieved, the Grimms, like tens of thousands of other families shattered by the pandemic, were now facing a cascade of secondary losses: income, home, school friends, long-held plans for the future. Because once the husband died of COVID at the age of 37, without his salary, they could no longer afford their mortgage, and the wife had to find us a new apartment. Her oldest son yelled at her when she told him that they had to sell their home. "It's the only house I've ever lived in," her son said. And that's important to think about, the kind of losses, because we must never fall prey to the idea that this is only impacting the unvaccinated. We can never just rub our hands and say, this is Charles Darwin's, this is natural selection at play. It's not appropriate to think of natural selection at a time like this. It's appropriate to think of this in terms of purposeful harm inflicted on America by people whose tribalism has advanced to a level that's so dysfunctional and destructive that they're hurting themselves, but also bringing harm on America more broadly. They're still harming the vaccinated. There are more cases. There is more transmissibility because of the perpetuating of the pandemic by people who choose to pretend that they're worried about the vaccine. People can pretend things in a manner that's so convincing they can persuade themselves. But the truth is, if Trump had openly encouraged them to get the vaccine straight away, they would have done so, and they wouldn't be so committed to trying to sabotage the Biden administration by using their own bodies as soldiers. Ah, yes. Bob notes that his anti-vaccination nephew...
9:57 a.m.
His anti-vaccination nephew was pestered by him to the point where he gave up and he got vaccinated. So Bob told me, but he wanted to let everyone on here know it's possible to change minds. I absolutely believe it, which is why I'm still talking to a Trumpy person online who won't get vaccinated so far. He's called me a whole bunch of names. He's called me the C word. He's called me a bitch a lot of times. Did you smash a mirror? No. How are you going with your hairbrushing, darling? Could you take your princess dress upstairs, please? Did you brush your teeth? What? You might get to see your friend, but you need to take your princess. I'm not sure if she's coming or not, but please take your princess dress upstairs for tidiness. Thank you, darling. Yeah, good girl. Yes, I will. I only told your brother to take it down because I thought you needed cheering up. Okay, I will put it back after the broadcast, but you know when I'm in the middle of the broadcast, I don't appreciate you asking me to do things, okay? That's Pinkie Pie. Pinkie Pie is a very friendly pony from an American television franchise called My Little Pony, which my daughter is very fond of. And my son also doesn't mind it, which is good because I endorse the value system perpetuated by ponies. They did have one episode which was decrying communism, unusually for a children's television show, but you can work in anything into a children's television show provided you use euphemisms. There was one charismatic pony leader who had persuaded all of the ponies to give up their unique talents and abilities, as evidenced by having a special mark on their pony flanks called the cutie mark, which not only describes your special abilities, but if you take the mark away, then you also negate your own special powers and talents and skills. So this pony, this communist proxy for a communist leader of a pony, had persuaded all these ponies to get rid of their special marks, and instead everybody had an equal sign on their hip, their horse hip. Not their cutie marks?
No, she wanted the full princess's magic to
Oh, I'm not talking about the movie, I'm talking about the television series when everybody got an equal sign, 2 bars on their butts. And it was to illustrate that being persuaded to giving up your uniqueness and out of fear of competition, which is what communism is. It says you shouldn't have too great a gulf of economic inequality. So perhaps the solution to that is to get rid of everybody's special levels of wealth and their special jobs, and regiment everything more closely, which Americans are obviously very resistant to, and I'm on board with that. I see communism equally as lethal as fascism. I'm just not particularly afraid of communism impacting the United States, and I'm more afraid of the destructive consequences when people exaggerate the risks. What did you say? All right, just for a few minutes. But you're going to have to work out how to do it yourself if you want to, because I am on a broadcast. I may have mentioned this to you. And could you please close the door to Daddy's office because he's on a work call? Yeah. You can ask your brother for help. And your hairbrushing, he tried? Okay, well then you just have to do something else for a bit. Where am I up to? Yes, okay, we don't need the unfortunate family who've lost their principal breadwinner and have had to sell their home. That is a sad story, and it is important to communicate with vaccination holdouts. They won't recognize themselves if you point out to them the broader pattern of ethnic cleansing. But the thing is about governance is that there's elite people who govern, there's elite people who make the decisions. And if you can word things, if you can find the way to word things into a persuasive argument, you can reach the decision makers and persuade them that they have to mount as effective an opposition as possible to the levels of determination of Trump loyalists, and as well as brainwashed, fooled hippies on the far left, who it's often prevalent amongst white college-educated women, I know this, that they can be anti-vaccination because they subscribe heavily to something called the naturalistic fallacy, whereby you begin to think things are superior if they're natural. So you breastfeed and you go, well, that's natural, that's the best thing possible for my children. And apparently just letting their immune system be free of the malevolent impulses of modern medicine and modern vaccinations, that's better for them. And then they'll just live happy, natural, carefree, superior lives. And that's a very infectious pattern of poor judgment, often exhibited by white, relatively well-educated women, not all, but many. And I guess it's my job as a white woman with some moderate hippie leanings myself to keep vocally calling that type of behavior out and saying, look, ladies, the most effective thing for persuading anti-vaxxers, not Trump loyalists, but the kind of anti-vaxxers who have been influenced by Russian political operatives on the internet who have infiltrated mothers' groups on Facebook and Mother's Net in order to weaken the West one mind at a time by getting discussions going and using social pressure to bring more women around the idea that vaccines are antithetical to pediatric health, to the health of their children, and that in fact you're creating super children and superior children by avoiding vaccination and avoiding or being defiant with regards to modern medicine and modern science. So yes, my fellow college-educated white women, please stop that nonsense. If you're listening, oh yes, I said science has identified so far the most effective method of causing people to reconsider their positions if they're approaching it from a naturalistic fallacy position, and that is to just expose them to picture examples of children suffering from vaccine preventable diseases. So just showing women pictures of children with measles, severe cases of measles or chickenpox, because those diseases are vaccine preventable. And I think pictorial evidence, and I'm glad I've reminded myself of this, pictorial evidence circumvents the human tendency to argue with words. So we hear words and we interpret that almost as a physical attack on us, because it's an attack on the integrity of our ego and our self-respect to have our positions intellectually challenged, and people mount a defense against that attack, that word attack. So they hear the words that threaten their psyches, they attack back with words. But if you see a picture, that's a different pathway of processing information and evidence. And that's probably why you can avoid some of the reflexive defensiveness of people's psyches. Bob is making a point that he worries that stories of hospitals charging hundreds of thousands of dollars for COVID treatment may stop uninsured seeking medical help. Another reason for universal health care. Yes. Do you know, we should never be cheering more misery in the world. I'm just thinking of the orphaned children whose parents have contracted COVID and who lose their parents as a consequence. We should never be cheering that to say, yay, well, natural selection. We might be frustrated with Trump loyalists and frustrated with the consumers of vaccine disinformation. We're frustrated with them. They're not just hurting themselves, they're hurting the economy, they're hurting hospital systems. They are breaking the psychological composure of healthcare workers who are exhausted. And I will add the proviso that many nurses are not vaccinated, a surprisingly high proportion of nurses, but to also acknowledge that the occupation of nurses is often filled with white women, and with white populations, there's a higher likelihood that they will be politically conservative and so loyal to Trump and loyal to Trump's sabotage agenda. Whether they are conscious of this or not. They have bought into the sabotage the Biden administration agenda, so they're not getting vaccinated. Their surface motivations are all manner of things. Oh, they don't trust it, it's experimental. But we know those reasons are not true. Those people are really keen to treat themselves with experimental treatments when their lives are in danger. Hydroxychloroquine, or even before, they'll take hydroxychloroquine, they'll take ivermectin, and yes, they don't really have an objection to experimental medicine. They have an objection to taking things that people they believe to be liberal allies are asking them to take. Bob's 7 nieces and a nephew lost their father, who is Bob's brother, to COVID, and it shows what happens when you believe in conspiracy theories. Yes, conspiracy theories are deadly, and we can quite plainly see a lot of those effects at present. But what we can't see is the more insidious nature of harm to to Black and brown individuals and families. Because whether consciously or unconsciously, Trump loyalists are still believe that COVID is more likely to kill the other people, that Jesus or their whiteness is somehow protecting them and that they are at lower risk. And you hear lots of stories now of healthy, fit people who've suffered from COVID and potentially died, and they are very surprised. And their family members are very surprised and said, but they're so much better than fat Americans. I thought that was, that their guarantee that they would be able to survive COVID. And it was always a false guarantee. There was a likelihood that increases that you will have severe COVID if you don't get any exercise and you're overweight and you have comorbidities. That increases the likelihood that you'll have a severe case of COVID, but it still is very possible for healthy, fit people to lose their lives. This is a pandemic, and you can't just mess about with, well, fat people are more likely to get harmed than me, because there is still a level of likelihood that you will get it, and you should mitigate against that likelihood by taking the vaccine, rather than just dismiss it because you think you have less of a risk than the other type of people, than fat people or Black people or Hispanic people. Your sister-in-law is a Black woman and she was anti-vax for years. Yes, and we've discussed on the show before how the basis of people in people who are Black to be more resistant to suggestions from the medical community, because they have suffered so significantly at the hands of the medical institutions and medically qualified individuals. There has been high levels of discrimination as well as willingness to experiment on Black bodies and Black people. So there is a rational basis to some of that, to a lot of that distrust. But I know leaders in the Black community and medical professionals who are Black have really exerted themselves to look out for their community and to be prominent and vocal in reassuring Black people that in any risk calculation, the risk of side effects from the vaccine is still much lower than the risks of contracting COVID and having significant heart problems or even death as a consequence. Us, her, and my brother were evangelical. Okay, yes. So the subset of the Black community that's probably most receptive to anti-vaccination disinformation would be the evangelical community. It's a characteristic of evangelicals that they construct a lot of their identity around embracing belief for belief's sake and rejecting empirical evidence, or rather embracing things in the full knowledge that there's no way to empirically prove them or not. So when you make your identity about that, ascribing virtue to just believing in things and forming bonds of fellowship with other people because you believe the same unprovable things, that shapes your identity, and identity is a very strong driver of behavior. Molly's here too. Molly, hello. I've seen you for a little while. I haven't broadcasted very much. It's been a lot. We've moved house. We still don't have our stuff yet from Singapore, but we have some rented stuff, and the children are adjusting to leaving behind yet another set of friends. They managed to make some friends when we were in Boston City for 4 weeks, which was lovely. But now they miss those friends too, and we have a play date shortly. They're visiting us because we're not that far out of Boston. Oh no, Molly needs to get a surgery but can't right now because our hospitals are full. Yes, so you are part of the collateral damage of the campaign of sabotage being waged by Republican foot soldiers, Trump Republican foot soldiers who are hurting American healthcare systems and hurting American healthcare workers, clogging up hospital departments with unnecessary cases of COVID. Unnecessary because the cases of severe COVID are predominantly unvaccinated people, but even the cases of vaccinated people, the breakthrough cases of people who are vaccinated and have COVID, that is still of how much COVID is prevalent in communities because of people's refusal to vaccinate and help bring their communities up to a level whereby herd immunity could be achieved. So all of the COVID that's around is a function of Trump foot soldiers carrying out an agenda of sabotage. They're sabotaging American hospitals. They're sabotaging the collective health of the American people. They're sabotaging the emotional and physical health and psychological health of healthcare professionals who are still having to work overtime and expose themselves and their children, their unvaccinated children, to danger through perpetuating a pandemic that could be over by now. America could have achieved vaccinated 90% vaccination status easily by now. Singapore's been vaccinating 1% of their population each day. It's a smaller population, but they're up to 78% now. And it's been 1% a day increase for the last 20 days once they realized that they couldn't just rely on their ability to lock down effectively. They're quite an authoritarian government, so they were able to enforce lockdown measures very strictly, and they were just resting on their laurels for that achievement and slow walking vaccination. And then once they realized they were having Delta outbreaks and that Delta is more transmissible and was going to make a mockery of their previous lockdown success, they really ramped up the vaccination efforts. And now, as I've said, they're nearly vaccinated their entire population, and they're able to relax some of the restrictive lockdown measures. And that's where America should be. It did the relaxing, but the achievements of the rapid vaccination rollout have been purposely, willfully undermined by an army of Trump supporters who are working to sabotage America as out of spite for their messiah having lost the election, and out of an effort, not just spite, but out of a conscious goal to try and create such chaos in the United States that the ground is paved for Trump to be reelected in 2024. They are ruining America. They are taking American lives, including their own, to make the economy collapse, to make public school untenable, to create so much conflict and division that America is in such turmoil that people reflexively vote out whoever is in power, because Americans have a habit of over-attributing power to the federal branch of government, which is very powerful, but it's not the legislative branch, and it's not the judicial branch, and it certainly does not control politics at a state level. And Republican governors at a state level many of them have been doing their absolute best to support the Trump agenda of sabotaging the health and well-being of people in the United States, in order to advance a narrative still of freedom over public health. Molly says, I'm rather angry because it's a surgery that I need to have. I'm angry on your behalf too, Molly. It's unfair. Everybody who has a stroke, who's in a car accident, children who break their legs, women who have complications of labor will find it that much more difficult to get the medical care they need to save the lives of their baby, to have surgery that will help them live free from constant debilitating pain, to have an increased chance of survival from cancer. All of the early operations that are done to remove cancers before they metastasize throughout the body. All of those conditions are being jeopardized by the occupation, the hostile occupation of hospital beds by Trump loyalists, by stubborn as all hell Trump loyalists who, whether they know it or not, are foot soldiers in advancing an agenda of sabotage. Bob saw a doctor talking about how he will not treat COVID patients that refused vaccines. It's hard because people also lie about whether or not they're vaccinated now and buy fake vaccination cards. There are people selling fake vaccination cards. And also, America has a tendency to be overly tolerant of misbehaving white people, and to say, well, it's just their opinion. So turns out I live near some Trump supporters now. They're my neighbors. They're very friendly. They came over to our lawn to talk to our children and myself, who were playing on our new front lawn. And I was happy to see neighbors. I said hello, and they chatted to us. We had a lot in common with them. And then the dad said, oh, he had to go out and buy dinner, and he drove away in his truck. And as he drove away, I could see a Trump 2020 sticker on his car, which threw me into a little bit of emotional confusion. And we went back inside. Because it's not as if I don't believe that Trump supporters are people. I believe that they're people, and that there's a continuum of being well-meaning but misguided. There's degrees to which people subscribe to anti-Black racist ideas. There's a degree to which different people think, oh, well, if you just work hard, you won't have any problems, so there's no point pointing out systemic racism. And it's not fair to police officers if you accuse police of harboring high levels of racist people in their ranks who brutalize Black people for no good reason. There's people who think, how dare you do that? And they, like my neighbors, fly a thin blue line flag. I said, well, is your dad a police officer that you have that flag? And they said, oh no, he's not a police officer, but we have that flag to show support for police officers, and because of everything that's happened, and because of COVID. So I had to process that the thin blue, the sort of black and white version of the American flag with a thin blue line in it, they're flying it to support police officers, and because of COVID and everything that's happened. And that tells me that everything that's happened probably references the Black Lives Matter social justice protests that are often falsely characterized as riots, even though rioting was a small, often fringe element of what happened, and that predominantly there was a mass movement in America to acknowledge what had often been under-acknowledged, the pervasive degree of injustice and brutalization of American citizens purely because of their Black skin color, triggering a racist, vicious response from attending police officers, with a level of audacity in terms of willingness to murder one person, George Floyd, in public, but that meant there was likely to be an implied level of audacity amongst other police officers to brutalize other Black Americans in the knowledge that their word would be believed because they were an institution. Police officers were part of an institution that many Americans intuitively trusted and relied on. Bob says he was giving neighbors tomatoes and was vaccinated. The other said he didn't believe in COVID. I just shook my head and walked away. Yes, because that's a big gulf between reality and that person. And they've had a year of evidence of COVID existing, and 600,000 deaths, and long COVID, and all of the sacrifices people made to try and reduce transmission, sacrifices which are being blithely undermined now by Trump soldiers who are waging a war against America on his behalf. Norma Jean notes that 30 years of Fox News and right-wing radio has affected many Americans' minds. Very true, Norma Jean. I completely agree, and I apologise for my Australian background, given that Rupert Murdoch is an Australian export who has done more than anybody else, I think, probably around the world, to poison people's minds, to make them believe falsities about the contributions to undervalue the contributions of migrants, and to be overly suspicious of interlopers, and to center their identity around preserving white dominance. The crazy thing is his whole family has COVID. Yes, that's an extraordinary display of the ability to maintain a Trump-centered reality of COVID's not real, it's not a big problem, when his whole family has had COVID and his daughter still can't taste or smell after having it in February. Well, I think the apex examples of people whose brains have been fried by loyalty to Trump and exposure to conspiracy theories is the father of someone whose child was at Parkland during the mass shooting. And he acknowledged the child's pain initially, and then a year later, after noticing that Marjorie Taylor Greene was challenging David Hogg, fell into a rabbit hole of believing that it was a fabricated event and that the mass shooting didn't really happen, and would periodically make accusations against his own child and call them and tell them that if they were making it up, then they were a real piece of shit, which was very detrimental to the mental health of that child, who was still in recovery from and going through survivor guilt from the shooting from is it 3 years ago now? 2018. Yes, 3 years ago now, but they're still recovering from that because people are graduating high school and they miss their friends, and it's hard for them to just approach the world when you can see how, or you've lived through something that was so potently illustrative of the fragility of life and also the irrationality of much American governance when gun rights are still prioritized so much over the right to life of young people. Bob says, I hate to see them get the new variant, but there's a good chance they will. Yes, there's a very good chance they will because it's very, very infectious, and Delta is very infectious. And if you don't have the vaccine and you also don't wear masks because you're such a loyal Trump supporter that you choose to disbelieve in COVID's existence, then yes, you are likely to not take any precautionary measures to protect your family, and your loyalism to Trump guides all your life decisions and guides your risk-benefit calculations. So I've been talking for a while. I should go get ready for my son's friend. So take care, everybody. We need to keep up those precautions. We need to keep up mask wearing. We remember that everything is like a slice of cheese. There are holes in every slice of cheese. None of them are perfect. But when you line up 20 slices of Swiss cheese, you are increasing the level of protection. Oh, I'm going to, if the internet works with this, just very quickly. I hope the sound is, I'll turn the sound down. Okay, so that was some Proud Boys destroying, looting, and flipping a handicapped van in Portland. I always think it's very important as white people to engage with the harm done by other white people, white nationalists, because as their peers, our voices calling them out are very important, because too often we succumb to the motivation of indulging them because of freedom. Let them be them, or we feel some very low level of alliance or kinship with white people. We can acknowledge that it happens. It's often intuitive. They look like us, and we might. That's why I don't agree with everybody who complains that polarization is the worst problem that's befalling America. You need some polarization. You need some characterization of some people as the enemy in order to break through the bonds of white allyship, to break through the pattern of white people failing to hold other badly behaving white people to account. We have to hold them account. We have to hold Trump to account. We have to hold his enablers to account. We have to hold Proud Boys to account. And the FBI might be reluctant to do so. They conducted a sham investigation of Brett Kavanaugh. And all of these things have consequences. And all of these things harm us. They harm America as a whole. They harm the world. And white people can not afford to be passive anymore in the context of white wrongdoing. So hooray for polarization. Hooray for whatever it takes to wake white people up, myself included, to the extent of harm that unchecked white nationalists can do. White nationalist is a much better phrase than white supremacist, because I'm tired of attaching the word supreme or any variant of the word supreme to the word white when evidence so potently argues otherwise. White nationalists, people who want a white dominant nation, who want white dominant governance. They want to be able to disenfranchise minority voters. They want to be able to keep minority allies out of power. They would rather perpetuate a society where there is high inequality, just in order to preserve what they feel is a fair status quo. They think it's fair for there to be a societal hierarchy in which white people derive a disproportionate share of the benefits of prosperity, of capitalism, of everything. Molly's noting that Oregon is a recruiting area for racists because there's very few minorities, and that Oregon has a huge KKK problem. Well, that makes sense. So yes, next time we'll talk about the Proud Boys in Portland.
Are you finished?
No. Yeah, I haven't seen.
No, they're running very late. She sent a message.
Oh, she sent a message. I didn't get
They're
it.
running very late, so they'll probably be 11. Did you leave the keys to the Huntington Avenue on the
Yes.
desk? Are you sure?
Yeah.
So there were 2 sets?
2 sets.
Because they said they couldn't find one.
I left both sets on the table next to each other. It was scary to do it because.
Yeah. So
because
you did.
yeah,
You just
absolutely
fell
did.
right back to them saying you left 2 sets.
Yep. There's a person in that car, so it's very destructive. It's very destructive, violent behaviour, and very illegal. But the police officers had already made an announcement that they weren't going to be part of the event. Someone says, the amount of Proud Boys that I've talked to that get so worked up when I bring stuff like this up, but then turn around and blame Black Lives Matter for all the riots and damage to cities. Well, a lot of them, particularly if they watch Fox, will have been shown very repetitive footage of things on fire. So they believe that American cities all nearly burnt to the ground because of Black Lives Matter. They have a very distorted perception of the world. And my son read something to me last night from a nonfiction book he was reading of random facts. And he said people who suffer from arachnophobia perceive spiders to be bigger than they are. And that extrapolates well to Proud Boys. Proud Boys think the property damage that was attendant to some of the BLM protests, the George Floyd social justice protests, was much bigger than it is, because they are afraid of an inverted social order in which white dominance is not just faded out, instead white dominance is replaced by black dominance. They are afraid of Black people burning everything, communism taking over America. Their fears are distorted and unreasonable and compel them to behave violently and illegally, and compel police officers out of a misguided sense of white nationalist loyalty, group loyalty, to ignore their illegal behavior in many and most cases. So the Proud Boys are often warned when there's going to be a police presence. The police will make arrests from any of the Antifa turnout and tear gas and spray people who are at a peaceful protest, whilst standing back and allowing a lot of Proud Boys to get away with property damage and violence and interpersonal harm. So Terrapin is here, Mark is here, and says we have a policing problem. Yes. Mark is also saying I would disagree that there's currently a big KKK problem. Or maybe you will acknowledge that there's a problem if we describe it with the term white nationalist. So many people recognize the term KKK, but yes, white nationalism is what infects the thinking of Proud Boys, and white nationalism is a lot of the motivating impetus for the type of people who oppose public safety measures such as lockdowns and mask wearing and vaccination. And they would vaccinate in a heartbeat if Trump had come out strongly from the beginning, suggesting that because he brought vaccinations, or he helped his administration promoted subsidy programs for some of the people working on vaccines. Some companies accepted them. Pfizer didn't accept the Trump administration's help for funding vaccine development because they were afraid that would interfere with uptake of the vaccines. But yes, if Trump had held office, he would have promoted the heck out of vaccines, and all of these people's stated objections would fade away. They wouldn't have any concerns about the government imposing vaccines on people. They would do it for love of Trump if he had openly and repeatedly asked people to be vaccinated. Now, yesterday in Alabama, Trump did advocate for people to get vaccinated. Was it yesterday or the day before? Trump rally vaccination. Alabama has the nation's lowest vaccination rate, apparently, and as a result is out of ICU beds and had to ask for FEMA assistance to deal with the crisis. So I'm as guilty of this as anybody, but guilty of just waiting for hospital system collapse to motivate more people to get the vaccine. So it has motivated some people, but it's not enough of an appreciable difference at this point to help fix the problem because of that problem of tribalistic identity shaping vaccine defiance. Mark says, good people in Portland, Oregon chased off the Proud Boys. Where were the police? The police had made an announcement that they weren't going to interfere, and that they were going to just stand back and recommend that people not antagonize each other or harm each other. So it's an unusual position for police to take, but I think you can extrapolate from that the loyalties of the police lie with the Proud Boys, and hence their determination to not enforce the law when they knew that Proud Boys would be likely the instigating agents in a conflict. So those are the conflicts they choose to hold back on and remove themselves from proximity. Oops, wrong one. Here we go. No ICU beds in Montgomery. Run out of ICU beds. COVID cases surge. Alabama leads nation in child COVID-19 hospitalization rate. Alabama hospitals facing staff shortages. Prepare for breaking point as COVID cases soar. Hospitals underwater amid COVID-19 crush as feds send medical team. So they're consuming a lot of, their Trump loyalty is consuming a lot of resources. There's a trending topic of anti-vaxxers. Also, the FDA, is that new? The FDA approves vaccine for people 16 or older. I feel like it was already approved. So today is the day. 51 minutes ago, at least Mehdi Hassan was reporting, the FDA grants full approval to the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. And this decision is likely to set off a cascade of vaccine requirements by hospitals, colleges, corporations, and some state and local something. So that's at least a good development, because compulsion will be the only thing to motivate these people. Some people will still resist until you actively put them in jail, which is obviously too coercive for a democratic government. So there'll just be financial, employment, and social consequences. They need that, and that's a good example for all of us. We should have social death type of consequences for the type of anti-society soldiers, the type of people who are working like bombs to sabotage public health, who are keeping Molly out of hospital where she needs surgery for some important reason. Norma Jean lives in Alabama, Stan. Oh, no, poor Norma. It's worse than Massachusetts in almost every way except football. Ah, yes. Is Friday Night Lights set in Alabama? I haven't seen it. Somebody says he deleted his tweet that stated his opinion about anti-vaxxers. It was a bit harsh and no one should be denied treatment. He's frustrated because of those who choose to stay willfully ignorant is making it so much harder for our frontline medical workers. Yes. I will share that tweet with Coach Owens, who's the chap that I'm working on, to see if it helps. Shall I leave him alone today? I don't think so. I think today is the day. I shared with him footage of Trump recommending people get the vaccine. NBC News reports that Trump told his supporters to get vaccinated. I recommend take the vaccines, Trump said. I did it, it's good. So NBC is reporting that they were booing him, which is interesting. Interesting that he would be booed, because it helps us say, look, more potent than Trump himself is Trump's ability to spin a narrative. And the narrative has more reverence attached to it than Trump. So you could be an ad first.
Tens of thousands of people in Alabama gathering for the wave of boos act by.
I'm just going to pause it. Thank you, darling. So they said they'd get here around 11?
No, they just said they're running very late.
Very late, okay. All right. Bob says, Holly and I got our booster shot. That's excellent, because immunity is waning after 8 months.
I do. As the state struggles with a surge of new coronavirus cases, for Donald Trump's rallies, Trump facing a wave of boos, in fact, by his own supporters. Tell the crowd to get freedom. Welcome, Olivia. Good to see you, my friend. Let's get to your former position. So and educating.
Oops. All right, so Norma notes that the video is not working right. So I don't know if you guys had any access to the audio there, but Donald Trump told the crowd to get vaccinated, which is so surprising to me to hear him actually reverse position and be public about the fact that he's vaccinated and that he recommends it. Means perhaps that it's getting through to him about the potential demographic outcomes that Trump supporters are using their own bodies as weapons against the Biden administration, but that could result in a depleted number of Republican voters, even given all of the advantages conferred by gerrymandering and the advantages conferred by the census. And the census wasn't apparently as bad as people feared. They feared that immigrants would underreport their existence out of fear of an anti-immigrant Trump administration, and that this would give a political advantage in districting terms to white nationalist Republicans. Trump is now telling his followers to get the vaccine because maybe they understand that if they lose too many pro-Trump Republicans to COVID, that will undermine their political chances in the future. It also makes it harder to keep selling that narrative of individual freedom. People can get into a really irrational frenzy, a really psychologically defensive frenzy in which all of the evidence of hospitals filling up means nothing to them, and they keep repeating their irrational logic of vaccine opposition. Is now will it change? Will it make much of a ripple in their resolve to promote Trump and illustrate their loyalty to Trump and their defiance of the Biden administration and the doctors whom they perceive to be allies of the Biden administration? Will it put a dent in their resolve that the FDA has now just completed the formalized process of recommending vaccines? So they'd already granted an authorization of the vaccines, the COVID vaccines. It was just given the term emergency authorization, but that was still just a permutation of authorization. The vaccines were still authorized, but now they can, or at least the Pfizer vaccine can shed that emergency term. The FDA processes things in order, and they have gotten around to formalizing that authorization for Pfizer. Will that produce an appreciable dent in the resolve of Trump supporters to defy Biden as the enemy of Trump? So I've now been broadcasting for an hour, which means it's a good time for me to stop and go hang with my family. Thank you so much for listening. I hope the internet quality hasn't been too bad. I hope within a few days we've ordered some Wi-Fi extender things, plugins, so that might help improve the ability of Wi-Fi to function in this house. I'm always looking for good internet quality because it is somewhat embarrassing and dysfunctional to have poor Wi-Fi quality when you're trying to transmit a broadcast. So fingers crossed for that. Chris is still here. Thank you, Chris. He says, have a great day, Dad. Chris, thank you to Molly and Norma and Bob. Thank you for ordering your eye of good news to balance out the fairly negative tendencies of my broadcasts. Negative just because I'm trying to remedy a deficit, what I perceive to be a deficit on the part of white people, to hold other white people to account, effectively to account for destructive antisocial behavior at an institutional level as well as at an individual level. I think sometimes people rely on karma. Karma is not a valid thing to rely on, but frustrated people people who've been rendered passive because of a series of defeats. That's when people start to say, well, I'll just have to wait for karma to achieve things because I've lost faith in my ability to achieve things on my own or achieve things collectively. It means you need stronger organizations when you hear people start talking about how karma will get them. Bob says, say hi to Mr. Dav. I will do, Bob. I try to always remember that. Congratulations on getting your booster shot, Bob. That means your immunity will once again be strong, which you need because of the increased contagiousness of Delta and the enhanced ability of the virus to evade weak immune responses. Who else do we have here today? Molly, I'm so sorry that your surgery is indefinitely postponed because of the unnecessary and avoidable resurgence of COVID. And that's all. Thank you to anybody who watches this on replay. And I know Bob's suggestion is for me to branch into TikTok. If anybody has any other suggestions as well, as I get settled here in the Boston suburbs, I might have more time and opportunity to explore different avenues to branch into. So anybody with any suggestions on how to refine and fine-tune this broadcast or increase the structure of it, let me know. If you know of anybody with any aptitude or abilities to volunteer to be part of this. As I've said, I want to avoid passivity. I don't want to get disheartened by defeat. I want to focus on successes and on the need for more efforts to be made to achieve more pro-social victories. Not just, I want my team to defeat your team. I want to safeguard American society. I want to improve American life, keep the progresses made already and build on them and work together to a more towards a better union. What's the phrase? Towards, we'll look it up. A more perfect union, that's probably the phrase. To work towards a more perfect union, a more perfect and more just union in which Black taxpayers receive the same value for their societal contributions as white taxpayers, where they're no longer receive an inferior service from police officers because of embedded systemic racist tendencies in various police departments, in various police training curriculum, in the type of training manuals that expose new police recruits to repetitive videos of Black offenders rather than a more representative mix of skin colors. Because those training materials are put together by white nationalists who want to maintain a social hierarchy in which Black people are relatively subjugated, and white people receive a friendlier, better service. Some people just want to preserve white favoritism, so that it doesn't matter how bad the service is, as long as you can relish the segregated advantages, relish the tiers of advantage, and relish knowing that somebody has less than you, that somebody is more likely to be treated worse than you, and that you are more likely to have to be treated favorably. Yes, so that's all what I'm about and what this broadcast is about. Bob also notes his increased age also means the booster is advantageous for his health and safety and his chances of avoiding severe case of COVID and COVID-related hospitalization. Bob wants to know if my dad is doing well or how is he doing. He's doing very well. He's recovering from a heart attack and has received both shots of the vaccine now, thanks to me and my persuasive abilities. He's a little bit susceptible to online fear-mongering and he had cancelled his appointment for the second shot. And I told him to uncancel it. And he did. He was able to resurrect his reserved vaccine appointment. So hooray, my dad is fully vaccinated now. And I will keep offering him whatever I can in terms of friendly help, because I still love and respect my dad. And I put him in the category of well-meaning people who have a vulnerability to being misled by white nationalists and white nationalist centric media outlets, like anything Rupert Murdoch does. Rupert Murdoch newspaper publications, Rupert Murdoch media channels, Rupert Murdoch influence over Australian media as a whole. That makes my father feel, it gives my father a false sense of white invulnerability. So in March 2020, when he went on a cruise, as the pandemic was really kicking off internationally, and I begged him not to, and he said he would be fine, that it was mostly Australians going on the cruise. And that showed me that he did not understand the risks of the pandemic, and he did not understand the risks of going on a cruise during a pandemic, and that he falsely assumed his whiteness and being in the company of other white people would protect him or would act protectively. So he was lucky his cruise ship did not have an outbreak, but another cruise ship that docked in Sydney Harbour at the day before or the day after his cruise ship returned, they did have a severe outbreak of COVID, and many people were hospitalised as a consequence of that. And people released from that cruise ship spread COVID throughout my home state of New South Wales just after that, and was a big scandal. So even though he was safe, I think it illustrated the risky nature of cruises at that time. And I know cruise ships now tend to require vaccination, and that the Trump loyalist, Republican Ron DeSantis of Florida, took that to court, instituted a ban on cruise ships requiring vaccination prior to embarkment on a cruise, and that the courts have, I think, stopped him from being able to do that, at least temporarily. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, thanks so much, everybody. Take care. All the best, and talk to you sometime soon, hopefully. Bye.